when we think about urban schools that disproportionately enroll Black and Latino students, there are some structural differences between those schools and schools that enroll, say, more affluent students or larger portions of white students and students from wealth. Just for fun here, I think we all know the answer, but let's look at these two images from two different schools. So you see the one on your left with the students walking in through the metal detector. Then you see this other one that is much brighter, much cleaner. You might not be able to tell that they're actually college pennants lining the entire wall of the entire school. So there isn't a wall space anywhere in this particular school that doesn't have a college pennant. Which one of them is the school that enrolls 94% Black and Latino students? So one person here says the right. I'm hearing most other people say left. Yeah, left. Actually, it's both. Both of these schools enroll 94% Black and Latino students. Both of them are urban schools, right? But in media and elsewhere, we've been sort of socialized to think about urban schools in one particular way, right? They are notoriously misrepresented in a monolithic way, that they're dangerous, there's a lot of crime, there are kids hanging out hopelessly, terrorizing substitute teachers and white female teachers and so on. Those are the images that we have of urban schools. But yet, this particular study took us to some schools where there were extraordinary college-going cultures that had been created. And I'm going to talk a bit about that in a moment. So let me talk a little bit more explicitly about the study. We did the research in 40 public high schools that are part of the New York City Expanded Success Initiative. ESI is a part of the New York City Young Men's Initiative, which is out of the mayor's office. So the initiative is funded by the Office of the Mayor and Bloomberg Philanthropies and Open Society Foundations. And the purpose of the initiative is to improve life outcomes for Black and Latino males in New York City through education, criminal justice, employment, and so on. The education portion of the Young Men's Initiative is the Expanded Success Initiative at the New York City Department of Education. So there was a competition about 18 months ago for every public high school in New York to apply to be a part of the initiative. Ultimately, 40 schools were selected. These were not 40 of the highest performing schools in New York City. In fact, disproportionately among the 40 are incredibly low performing schools on a wide set of metrics. So I don't want you to think that these are the most exceptional places in the city. But instead, the 40 were chosen because they offered a compelling application to talk about how they would address college and career readiness for Black and Latino males. So it was the strength of the proposal, not the sort of historic performance of the school that ultimately led to the 40 being chosen. So these 40 schools were chosen. We had nothing to do with that. But last summer, they did a big kickoff event. The New York City Department of Ed did a big kickoff event for the Expanded Success Initiative. It was the first time that the 40 schools had been brought together, and they asked me to come and deliver the keynote. Now, my particular keynote address was about reinforcing the point that getting young men of color to college is only half of the battle, ensuring that they are prepared to succeed and that they ultimately persist through bachelor's degree attainment is also critically important. So I addressed this audience of principals, teachers, and others, guidance counselors from the 40 ESI schools at the keynote. At the end of it, folks from the New York City Department of Education said, wow, This study, this National Black Male College Achievement Study that you just talked with us about, it would be great if we could have some version of it, some adaptation of it in the 40 ESI high schools. So we did. We accepted the invitation to do that. The study was funded by Open Society Foundations, and it entailed 325 individual interviews with Black and Latino male high school juniors and seniors who had B or better GPAs. These were also guys who were engaged in multiple clubs and activities at their schools. They had planned to enroll in college immediately after high school. In fact, every senior whom we interviewed this past spring is enrolled in college right now. The juniors are now seniors and they are applying to college as we speak. These were also students who had taken a sequence of courses that qualified them thus far for admission to a four-year post-secondary institution. The way we found these students is that we worked with principals, assistant principals, and guidance counselors in the 40 high schools. We sent them these criteria and said, we are convinced, despite the hopeless narrative that's been created about Black and Latino males in urban high schools, we are convinced that there are some young men in your school who fit this profile. Lo and behold, at every one of the 40 schools, they did in fact find us Black and Latino males who fit this profile. I think that the point that I just made is a really critical one, because when I read narratives in education research, in newspapers, when I watch how young men of color are depicted on the news, we could very easily and very erroneously believe that there are no young men in any public urban high schools who fit this profile. We easily found 325 of them across these 40 high schools. Because we didn't do these interviews over the phone or via Skype, we were actually in these 40 schools week after week. We went to each of them. The full research team went to these schools. What we found even surprised us, right? Even Mr. Anti-Deficit himself was shocked when we got to the very first school in the study and we walked in the door and there were no metal detectors. I guess even I had fallen for sort of this image that's been created of the urban high school that is supposed to be dark and dangerous. So we walked in, there were no metal detectors. Then the principal's office was up on the 3rd floor, so we took the elevator. As the elevator opened, I was struck by how bright the walls were. It was not a dark place. So we stepped off and I looked around. I was also shocked by the enormous amount of college-going messages that were on the walls, that were lining the hallways. There was so much happening in this particular school to promote college going that it was staggering. Not what we think of when we think of the image of the urban public high school that enrolls 94% Black and Latino students. What you see on this slide is a wall from Central Park East High School, which was one of the schools in the study. Anytime a student got admitted to a college or university, there's this dot on the wall that talked about where, that listed where they got admitted. If they got scholarship money, it included that as well. To the left of it, which you can't see is cut off here, was a running total of the amount of scholarship money that that particular senior class had gotten so far. I can't remember the number right off, but it's in the report. Again, staggering how even something as simple as this, and I can't tell you how many other schools we went to where copies of students' acceptance letters from colleges and universities were lining the walls. Not something that we think about, right? At one school, one student whom we interviewed, this guy was a graduating senior, he talked about how his college-going aspirations were shaped by every day when the announcements are made on the intercom in his school. If a student has been accepted somewhere or gotten an offer of a letter of admission, the principal or whomever was making the announcement would say, Sean Harper has just gotten accepted to the University of Pennsylvania, right? For example. So every day there was this list of students and where they had been accepted. So this senior that we interviewed talked about how that particular practice made college going normal. He thought as a ninth grader, well, everybody here goes to college because every day we're hearing on the announcements that this person's got accepted here and that person's gotten accepted there. He also talked about how hearing that, you know, someone in his school, for example, had gotten admitted to Duke University, all of a sudden gave him the confidence that, well, gee, I guess I can apply to Duke. This guy is from my same high school and he's gotten into Duke. Well, it doesn't seem like so much of a stretch anymore.
Hi there. I'm Scott Jasek with Inside Higher Ed.
Hey, Scott.
Wanted to ask you, we've been talking about the undermatching study by Huxby and Avery, and you note that most of these students who went to college only thought about SUNY and CUNY. Do you think these are undermatched students, that many of them could have succeeded at other places?
I love Inside Higher Ed, one, and I love that question that you just asked. Scott, I'm not wearing a bonnet right now, but I do have a bee in my bonnet about this particular issue. The answer is yes. These kids were terribly, terribly undermatched. I'll talk about why I think that, or how I think that happened in a moment. But these were incredibly gifted students. They were very bright. Again, we reached out to the principals, guidance counselors, and assistant principals at the 40 schools with that list of criteria and said, can you find us boys in your school who fit this profile? And these were their best and brightest boys. These kids, many of them were dual enrolled. They had taken courses at community colleges, college level courses, or some of them even at four-year institutions. They had taken SAT prep courses. They were involved in things like the Opportunity Network and iMentor and so on, that these college preparatory resources. They were incredibly prepared for college, but yet were applying to places that I don't think quite matched their brilliance. I will give you an even more specific example. On Monday, there is a big launch event for the report in New York City. The New York City Department of Education worked with me to construct the agenda for that event. They said, we would like to have 2 student speakers, one high school and one college. I say, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. We should do that. So they asked me to pick the 2 students. The high school student, this is a true story. The high school student I picked, in my view, is the smartest 17-year-old I've ever met. I was so blown away by this kid in our interview that I didn't even have to think about, I had 325 students from whom to choose. I chose this guy because I was so blown away by him in our interview. So he and I were going back and forth this week about his speech. And I asked him, I was like, oh, by the way, you're a senior now. Where are you applying for college? He said, I'm applying to Penn State Altoona. And then I waited for the rest of it. But that was it. The brightest kid that I met in this study is applying to Penn State Altoona. Now, look, I don't have anything against Penn State Altoona. I don't. This kid could go to Harvard or to the University of Pennsylvania. But he I'm not going to let him. So tomorrow, I'm meeting with him to do an in-person dress rehearsal for his speech, and we're also going to talk about his college options.